Once there was a little farm with a pond full of geese and ducks. On a fine spring morning, a mother duck felt her eggs start to crack beneath her. One by one, all the eggs broke open, with each new baby duckling cuter than ever. Until the last egg broke open. The duckling did not look like the other cute little ducklings. He was gray and clumsy and way too big. The mother duck thought, "How big and clumsy this duckling is." But she loved him just as much as the other ducklings. The next day, the mother duck took her ducklings to meet the other farm animals. As soon as they entered the farmyard, the other animals started to call the gray duckling names. "Look at the ugly duckling," said a mean old goose. Soon, his own brothers and sisters were calling him names. They called him Ugly Duckling. This went on for days, and the ugly duckling decided to run far away. He ran deep into the field. He finally came upon a pond full of geese. It was nighttime, so he fell asleep in the tall grass surrounding the pond. In the morning, the ugly duckling was just about to meet the geese when they were scared by a hunter and his dogs. The ugly duckling stayed in the long grass and hid from the hunter and his scary dogs. When he was sure they were gone, he started to walk towards a cottage he could see. An old woman lived there with her prize hen and cat. The old woman let the ugly duckling stay because she thought she could fatten up the duck to sell him at the market. The prize hen and the cat were very rude to the ugly duckling, and besides, there was no water for him to swim on here. So the ugly duckling snuck away one night to find a lake. He found a nice lake, but none of the other birds spoke to him. They thought he was too ugly to bother with. One day, a beautiful flock of white birds with long necks flew overhead. The ugly duckling began to cry, but he had no idea why. It was getting colder, and soon all the other birds left the pond because winter was coming. The ugly duckling stayed and awoke one morning to find his feet frozen in the lake. A nice, kind farmer found the ugly duckling and saved him. He thought he would be a nice house pet for his children, so he brought the ugly duckling home. His wife and children were not very happy with the ugly duckling, and so the ugly duckling snuck away to find a new home. It was winter, and the ugly duckling found a spot on a pond's edge. He built a nest. He was safely hidden to snuggle away the whole winter. Finally, spring arrived, and the pond thawed. The ugly duckling spread his wings. He found his wings grew very strong during the winter. The ugly duckling landed gracefully on the lovely pond. Just as he landed, he noticed 3 snowy swans near the pond's shore. He felt the same way he had had the first time he saw them fly overhead. The ugly duckling slowly swam over to meet the swans. And then, as the ugly duckling swam, he noticed his own reflection. What do you think he saw? His own reflection was that of a beautiful white swan. You see, over the winter, the ugly gray duckling had grown into a beautiful, white, graceful swan. and he was the most beautiful bird of all. The new swans welcomed their new swan friend. The swans were so very nice to the ugly duckling, who was now a stunning white swan. The ugly duckling promised himself he would never forget the lessons he had learned as a young ugly duckling, as he lived happily ever after with his new family on the beautiful pond. Long ago, in a small village, a woodcarver named Geppetto made a wooden puppet. It looked so much like a real boy that Geppetto gave it a name, Pinocchio. The old man was so happy, he showed the puppet to his cat Figaro and his goldfish Cleo. As Geppetto showed his puppet to his dear pets, a small cricket named Jiminy Cricket snuck into Geppetto's house to have a warm night's sleep. Jiminy Cricket watched as Geppetto set the puppet down and gazed out the window at the stars. "Look at that! The wishing star!" Geppetto cried. Geppetto wished Pinocchio was a real boy. Soon it was bedtime, and Geppetto, Figaro, Cleo, and Jiminy Cricket all fell asleep. Before long, a beautiful light filled the workshop and woke up Jiminy Cricket. It was the Blue Fairy. She had heard Geppetto's wish and was there to make Pinocchio a real boy. She touched the puppet with her magic wand, and Pinocchio came to life. But Pinocchio had to prove he was brave, truthful, and unselfish to become a real boy. The Blue Fairy knew Pinocchio would need help, so she made Jiminy Cricket his helper, so he would help him to choose between right and wrong, and prove himself. Geppetto was delighted with Pinocchio, and he sent him off to school like a good parent. On the way to school, Pinocchio met a sly fox, who said Pinocchio could make a lot of money and didn't have to go to school. Jiminy Cricket didn't trust the sly fox. The sly fox said he could spend all of his time having fun in the theater instead of studying at school. Pinocchio said, "Okay!" and off he went with the sly fox to the theater owner. That night, the theater owner put Pinocchio on stage. He was a big hit as he sang and danced for the crowd. The crowd threw money on the stage. Jiminy Cricket, who was in the crowd, worried. After the show, the theater owner locked Pinocchio up and said, "You will live here and make me lots of money." Pinocchio and Jiminy Cricket wondered how he could escape. Luckily, the Blue Fairy arrived. She asked Pinocchio why he missed school. He lied. She asked him more questions, and each time he told a lie, his nose grew longer and longer. The Blue Fairy reminded him to tell the truth if he wanted to be a real boy. Pinocchio promised he would tell the truth. She fixed his nose and set him free. The next day, Pinocchio met the sly fox again. The sly fox convinced Pinocchio to not go to school, but instead play and have fun all day. Pinocchio followed the fox, not returning home after regular school time. Geppetto was worried and went to look for Pinocchio. Geppetto sailed his boat to search for Pinocchio, and he was swallowed up by a huge whale. When Pinocchio returned home from playing all day, he found this out, and he knew he must save Geppetto. Pinocchio and Jiminy Cricket found the huge whale, and they teased him with the fish. The whale grabbed the fish, the pole, Pinocchio, and Jiminy Cricket, and they were all swallowed into his belly. They found Geppetto in the whale's belly too. They must find a way to escape from the whale. They decided they would make the whale sneeze, and they would all escape when the whale opened his mouth. It worked, but when the whale saw them in the water, he thrashed around, knocking everyone about. Pinocchio had to grab Geppetto to save him. After a while, the water settled down and Geppetto and Jiminy Cricket awoke on the beach. They found Pinocchio lying lifeless on the rocks. Geppetto was heartbroken, and he carried his son home in his arms, convinced he had lost Pinocchio forever. Back in the workshop, Geppetto and Jiminy Cricket cried, and then all of a sudden, the blue fairy appeared. She touched her wand on Pinocchio and said, "Awake!" Pinocchio awoke, and the blue fairy said, "By saving Geppetto, you have proven yourself to be brave, truthful, and unselfish." "I am a real boy!" shouted Pinocchio. Pinocchio, Geppetto, Jiminy Cricket, and all the pets celebrated and danced as Geppetto's wish had come true. Pinocchio was a real boy. There once was a poor country man whose only inheritance to his 3 sons was his farm, his donkey, and his cat. The eldest son inherited the farm, the second eldest the donkey, and the youngest son inherited the cat. "What on earth will I do with a cat? I can barely feed myself," said the youngest son. "Let alone how can I offer this pet anything? I have no money and am so poor." "Don't worry," said the cat. "If you can get me a sack and a pair of boots, you will see I am the most valuable thing your father ever owned." The son brought the cat what he asked for, as he knew he had nothing to lose. The cat put on the boots and took the sack to catch a plump rabbit. The cat wore the boots on his journey. He would be called Puss in Boots. He caught a plump rabbit and brought it to the king. Puss in Boots told the king the plump rabbit was a gift from his master, the Duke of Carabas. For several weeks, Puss in Boots brought the king many gifts from his master. The king was very curious about Puss in Boots and his master, the Duke of Carabas. But the king knew that the Duke was friendly and had the most well-behaved cat he had ever met. The king did not know that Puss in Boots had made up the name Duke of Carabas for his poor master. One day, the king and his daughter were riding in their carriage by the river. Puss in Boots told his master to take off his pants and shirt and jump in the river. His master agreed to do so. Then Puss in Boots yelled out, "Help! Help! The Duke of Carabas is drowning!" as the king's coach passed by him. The king ordered his driver to stop, and he told his guards to rush over and save the Duke of Carabas. The king saw Puss in Boots yelling and knew he must help him, as he had been so generous to the king. Puss told the king the Duke's clothes had been stolen. So the king offered the Duke a fine suit of his own clothes to put on. The Duke of Carabas got in the carriage for a ride. The king's daughter quietly told the Duke he looked very handsome. The Duke looked at her and told her she was very beautiful. Along the way, Puss had asked all the farmers and workers on the road, "If the king drives by, you must tell him the owner of all these lands is the Duke of Carabas, or the ogre who lives in the castle will eat you." All the farmers and workers answered when asked that the Duke of Carabas was their landowner when the king asked them. Puss in Boots ran ahead to the ogre's castle and asked the ogre about the trick he could do by changing into a small mouse from a big ogre. Puss in Boots told the ogre no one believed he could do a trick like that. The ogre said, "Watch me," as he turned into a small little mouse. Puss in Boots grabbed the mouse and ate it up, and that was the end of the big bad ogre. Just then, the king's carriage arrived at the castle gate. Puss in Boots ran to meet the carriage. and said, "Welcome to the castle of the Duke of Carabas." His master could not believe what was happening. On the long ride in the carriage, he had fallen in love with the king's daughter. And Puss in Boots had planned everything to work out perfectly. The Duke asked the king if he could marry his daughter. And the king said, "Yes, of course." The Duke of Carabas and the princess were married and lived happily ever after in their castle. Puss in Boots was named a great lord and never had to hunt for mice ever again. Puss in Boots proved he was the best inheritance, as he had promised his master. Once upon a time, there was a lovely princess who liked to take long walks into the woods. She wanted to play by the beautiful pond in the woods. After a while, she came upon the lovely pond. She sat by the side of the pond and began skipping rocks and enjoying her time. She had brought with her her treasured golden ball, a special gift from her father, the king. It was her most treasured toy. She just loved it. She threw it up in the air and caught it many times. She threw up her golden ball again, and it came down with a splash and landed in the pond. "Oh no!" cried the princess. "My beautiful golden ball! How will I ever get it back?" Just then, she saw an ugly frog coming out of the pond. The frog spoke and asked her, why was she crying? The princess could not believe she was hearing a talking frog. She blinked her eyes, and then the frog offered to retrieve her ball if she would let him live with her in her castle. She agreed to the deal and said, "Of course." The frog jumped back into the pond and dove very deep down and retrieved the princess's golden ball from the bottom of the pond.
Wow.
He then gave it back to the princess. She was so excited to get her golden ball back that she began to run back to the castle, forgetting all about her deal, leaving the frog behind. The frog was very sad and yelled, "Don't forget our deal, that I will come and live with you in the castle." The princess answered back, "How can an ugly frog possibly live with me in my beautiful castle?" And she continued on her way. The frog knew he must go to see the princess at her castle. She had to keep the deal they had made. The frog knew he had to convince the princess she must let him stay with her, even if it was just for a night or two. The frog cleaned himself up so he looked his finest. He hopped out of the pond and started to hop towards the castle. The frog finally came to the castle during the dinner hour. He hopped into the dining room, and then the princess had to tell the king all about the deal she had made with the ugly frog, about how he retrieved her golden ball from the bottom of the pond, and that he expected to come and live in the castle for retrieving the ball. The king listened to the story, and he insisted she must keep her word, and he welcomed the frog in. The frog hopped along and followed the princess to her room. He made himself very cozy on a bunch of pillows on her beautiful bed. He then fell asleep. In the morning, the frog awoke the princess and asked her for a favor. The frog asked the princess to kiss him, and he would leave her alone forever. The princess was annoyed by the frog, but she could not believe it, and she said, "Why would I kiss an ugly frog?" Just then, a tiny teardrop came out of the frog's eye. The princess saw the teardrop and thought she'd best give the frog a kiss. Then he would just go away anyway. As she kissed the frog, he turned into the most handsome prince. The princess could not believe her eyes. The handsome prince told her how the evil witch had cast a spell on him and had turned him into the ugly frog. The only thing that would break the spell was a kiss from a lovely princess. When the princess heard this story, she fell in love with him immediately. The prince then asked her to marry him. She said yes. They held the wedding by the beautiful pond, and they lived happily ever after in the beautiful castle.